Fuck, I'm hungry.
Oh, you didn't eat.
Yeah, I haven't eaten yet. Come on, guys. I gotta eat after this. Let's hurry up.
Where's your Occupy Mars shirt? See, you
Oh
got,
yeah,
you got
I got this. I went to NASA, guys.
What do you mean
yeah,
with
you're
the
not rep.
NASA? In Houston, you mean?
Yeah,
Went to the Kennedy Space Center?
Oh,
It's so cool, right?
it was amazing, and because it act like a curious child. They actually let you do a side thing. Did you go to the astronaut training center?
No, they
Oh,
have that.
fucking cool, bro! I got to see the astronauts training. I got to meet some astronauts.
it's like a little kid.
Yeah, it was me and
Fuck.
it was the best day of my
How
life
how they possibly mistake you as a child?
because I was like asking a million questions, and then someone was like, asking
Are
me.
you a good boy? Do you want to do
Yeah,
something
she was like,
yesterday?
I was like, I wanted to be the astronaut when I was a kid. All right, come with me, sir. Come with
Come,
me.
child.
Where are we going?
Come, small child.
All right, guys. Dave is about to be hangry, transformed into the food Hulk. So let's begin.
Get started, please. I'm so hungry.
Done.
Yeah.
Hello, barbarians, and welcome to the 13th episode of the LLB podcast, Low Level Barbarians from Asia on Asia, with debate and discussion around trending topics. With us, myself, Alex, typically your host of EOA, man of the high ground, Dave Chang, who's very
Lucky
hungry.
13. Lucky 13.
At the 13th episode, yes, very lucky. Jangan, the information super connector, finally got a meeting room. Glad you're here. You have a new shirt for us, I see. The Empire did
Yes.
nothing wrong.
Yes.
And then Andrew G, if you haven't noticed, someone is back with us finally. Missing a few episodes. He went to NASA. He's very happy. He's now in London. He's not leaving London, apparently. Keeps saying he's coming back, but he's not.
By the way, just wanted to clarify, we call this episode 12 Asia.
Uh,
13.
Oh, no, this is 12A. Yeah, 12A.
Yeah, 12A. And next one will be 12B.
No, sorry. You got it backwards, dude. 13 is the Western bad luck number.
Those
13
are
is the Asian number.
some elevators you don't get 13 and 14.
Oh, is it? Oh, so they do Western and Asian? Okay.
Yeah. You gotta
Yep.
spend any gods.
That's true.
Typical Hong Kong.
Speaking of the gods, Asia is finally opening up. The gods have listened to us. All the countries pretty much are now open, right? Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore. You just need to take a PCR test or some form of a test, depending on the time zone, 1 to 2 days before coming to the country. Which begs a question, Andrew, why are you not back in Malaysia?
I gotta take a test, bro. So, yeah.
You gotta take a test.
once I find this test, maybe I'll come back.
Yes, PCR tests are so hard to find in London, aren't they?
But one of us needs to be doing research on the other side of it.
That's true. That's true. You are our global correspondent.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not sure what is there to talk about Asia opening up. I mean, I'm just excited that I'm going to be traveling soon. I'm going to Singapore soon, probably. After that, a few other countries, maybe go diving here and there. I don't know.
This is why I'm coming back. Now that you guys are leaving, I'll finally have the place.
Oh, I see. Asia wasn't big enough for the four of us.
Yeah, not enough, man.
So Alex, when we talk about Asia, do you mean Kuala Lumpur?
Yeah, I'll be back in Cal within this week or next
What
week.
do you mean? All of Asia's open, no? I mean, not China, obviously.
Not China. China's
Shanghai
indefinite
went
now.
on a full lockdown, indefinite lockdown. So, sorry, I should say Southeast Asia is all open.
Yeah.
North Asia pretty much open too, right? Except for China.
And North Korea and Taiwan.
Well, and North Korea, that's a forever thing, right? Oh, Taiwan, yeah. Taiwan's
Japan
still
open?
definitely. I think so, right? Not too sure.
So, no, ski season must have been rough for them, huh? This year, like the amount of countries. No, I'm serious. Like, think about how much tourism has been lost. It's not that last year. Like the scene for like just a lot of major cities, even London, you can see like restaurant closures because the high, hotel closures because the high, like space. And there's a lot of consolidation, right? Whoever had cash is buying up the others.
Well, I'm kind of curious, like, who benefits from this reopening the most?
Oh, I mean, that's clear, I think, right? I mean, if you look at like the list of the industries that were most adversely affected by the COVID lockdowns, like basically in order, it's like airlines, right? Leisure facilities, so your hotel, your travel, And then I actually, for some reason, oil and gas drilling, which actually makes sense because I guess people drive
Yeah.
less. There's less demand for oil, auto parts and equipment, which also makes sense. And then restaurants, restos, right? So those are the five
True.
that I think are going to bounce back the most. I think it's a more interesting question because we talk a lot about on this podcast about like these big tech companies like Shopee and Grab and GoTo, right? And I think you could make a pretty strong argument that these guys have gotten like a real boost during the COVID period, both because they operate in like e-commerce. So the e-commerce business obviously has seen a huge boom, deliveries as in food delivery, and then also to a certain extent their fintech businesses, right? Because they all have their proprietary payment platforms built in.
Yeah.
So I think if we're going to try and like connect this to the theme of the podcast, I think it's a question of like what's going to happen to these companies in terms of like their marketing costs in conjunction with the fact that we're going into like a higher interest rate environment, right? So I think it just sort of, it creates additional tailwinds or not tailwinds, sorry, headwinds for them as one, their share of wallet is going to drop down because a lot of the people that couldn't travel, couldn't eat out, what else can you do, right? You're going to spend your money on
Mhm.
e-commerce and you're going to order food delivery. So theoretically, you would assume that this was like, had a huge depressing effect on their marketing acquisition costs, but also on the overall supply of the wallet that these guys are capturing. So I mean, that's kind of my take on this.
Jungan, you had something to say?
I think talking about the marketing cost, Andrew would be the best person to comment on that, right? I do hear from people that in terms of customer acquisition, the cost last year, 2021, was already quite high as compared to 2020. And also, I think there seems, I mean, from all the data tracking, you see that there's a slowing down of e-commerce growth. But of course, there are different arguments. Some people are saying that, oh, compared to 2018, 2017, it's still faster, and now we're at much higher base, but of course, there's also the other side of the argument. So Andrew, e-commerce marketing, how do you see it?
So look, if you think about the equation, right, there's two things you have to do here. One is there's an absolute total. So there's two parts of this equation. Let's go through the first one first. There's an absolute total of customers that need to be acquired that are typically customers that have access to the internet at a regular basis and have a mobile phone and have some kind of access to it, right? So if you think about where Saudi Arabia is right now, that market, that M is big, right? Because there's a lot of people getting their first mobile phones, accessing 4G for the first time, and then getting into some kind of new payment, right? And so if you, that absolute market is growing, and that e-commerce is growing as a subset of that market at a faster rate than the other market is growing. So it will catch up at some point, but as long as the first market is, they're going to get there. Now the question is, how expensive is it to acquire? Here's the crazy thing: it doesn't matter. That's why, because as long as you have new customers coming in at a fast rate, and you can figure out the dynamics to create more and more repeat purchases from existing customers that you've already acquired to the app, then what happens is your absolute income ratio, so the ratio of your marketing costs as a percentage of overall revenue, will increase speedy rate.
Andrew, do you have like
as well?
Sorry?
yeah, sorry, Andrew. Just quick, do you have like I'm getting like a lot of crackle when you speak. Do you have like headphones or like a
No,
mic?
I'm just using the microphone on the Mac.
Can you
Yeah,
maybe get
you
closer
have-
to the Mac? Like I think
Yeah, maybe
on
put your,
mine,
put
yours
your
not
mouth
coming
closer to
through.
the microphone. Yeah,
Sorry, did you guys hear most of what I said?
kind of.
Okay,
I got the gist of it.
cool.
Steady state. Yeah, I didn't get much.
Okay,
So I'm the only one that said something. You guys are also let him talk forever,
guy.
and then come on. You might-
I was trying to process like what I heard.
We sort of believe in technology that we eventually figure itself out. Even though I can't really see Andrew clearly, I can't hear him clearly, but I believe that the amazing piece
yeah.
of technology that Alex has chosen would eventually render him clearly. Okay, so shall we do like what Japanese businessmen do all the time? So I don't understand. Can you repeat it? Can you repeat everything?
What was the gist of what you said?
So the gist of what I say is, even if your CAC goes up,
Okay.
your cost income ratio, the percentage of cost that you spend on overall GMV keeps decreasing on an exponential basis.
Oh, because you're Okay, because you have more stickiness and higher repurchases, higher
So
LTVs.
one is repeat purchases, and two is like, the rate at which the overall market for people with mobile phones, accessing the internet and having some kind of payment solution is still growing exponentially, which means that you're playing catch up to the top of that market, right? Every time you think you've gotten close to um to the scraping the bottom of the barrel gets bigger. This isn't the US or Germany where you kind of have it fixed already. The number of people who have like mobile phone.
It's even still growing in US. I'd say Amazon is still growing. So it's still the top is still far even.
Yeah, but the rate of the
Oh wait, yeah,
market
yeah.
of Asia is much faster, right? Like
That's true.
I think every year, like 30 million people get mobile phones for the first time. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
And so like, it's just, you know what I mean? Like that just suddenly opens up this whole new universe. And then your CAC for these customers is not higher than your CAC for other customers because they're just the same kind of customers. They just suddenly got introduced to Facebook.
Do you still stay in touch with these numbers, or like when you were leaving, what was that trend looking like? Because it's quite
Yeah, we got to
curious.
single digit percentage cost income ratios, right?
Okay.
Low single digit percentage, which means like, if you're spending 2% of your GMV on marketing, whatever lah.
Because to me, like your marketing horizon and the channels you'd be using to acquire probably at this point starts to evolve, right? The market is changing. There are new platforms. There's TikTok now, right? So I would imagine these kind of numbers alter with new ways to look
So
to acquire.
this was the second part of the conversation, which I think you guys might not have read. And so what I was saying is eventually all platforms devolve into using two types of marketing. One for intent based,
Oh, I see what you mean.
which is
Yeah.
typically search engine marketing. And the second is for non-intent based, where you're trying to create intent.
No.
And in which case you will find the cheapest possible market for the second, because the second one is usually expensive. So right now, if you think about it, YouTube, Google, count Shopee, Grab as some of their largest customers, right? But at some point, there's going to be enough intent created within the apps that they actually will not need these platforms anymore. In which case, they will devolve into using the cheapest possible intent-based marketing, non-intent-based marketing, which is affiliate marketing, right? Because you're fixing it on some kind of CPS as opposed to a CPC.
But from what you're saying, we're still pretty far from this, at least for Asia. And I'd even say like Amazon starting out must have been completely different ecosystem. They went straight for those channels right away because there was nothing else actually. There was no platforms for them to acquire off.
No, they have display marketing as well.
Well, display. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, but I mean, like
that's what YouTube and Google are. They're
Yeah,
YouTube and
yeah.
Facebook are. They display ads just in a single platform as opposed to a distributed network.
So even with macro headwinds, with everything opening up, this doesn't change much in your opinion. It's just still the same story that's going on.
Yeah.
Oh, quick question. How do you see the speed of things? So I think a few Hong Kong-based investors reached out to us 2 weeks ago saying that they've seen a piece of dynamic research, I think done by one of the big three consulting companies, who is projecting basically I think 10 to 15% GMA growth for e-commerce in Southeast Asia over the next 5 years, and that to
10 to
them is
15% annual growth.
yeah. So that to them is shockingly
Really?
low. Yeah.
Can you share that with us? I find that so hard to.
I said the same. I said, I mean, even in China, it took so long for them to reach such low growth, and the Southeast Asia is still at the stage where, I mean, you can basically calculate the penetration, right? It's not that high.
Yeah.
What would be the underpinning factor for that? Is it because wealth isn't distributed enough for it to keep up? The people cannot afford what? The repurchases are stuck. Not enough wealth. I mean, I don't know. What is it? What do you think?
I think it's basically it was done by one of the firms. So I have not seen the research myself, but I can make a few assumptions. I think one of the assumptions is obviously this going back to new normal kind of thing. People are going offline. So that's the assumption that they have built in. I think the other assumption is basically people's consumption power and the fact that the metropolises are sufficiently penetrated, and it takes much more effort to go to the second, third, fourth tier cities and rural areas. I find it hard to believe, to be honest.
Well, I mean but that's the whole strategy of like Shopee and Lazada, right? Just having low cost goods still will capture that market and grow, right? Even if the second and tier cities, they still consume, no? I mean, I don't know. I mean, Andrew, maybe you would know better still.
They're mostly growing out of the second tier cities.
Yeah.
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 So, like, if you think about the needs of customers, right? The assortment that Shopee and Lazada brings, it's easier to find in urban cities. So, urban population is more likely to buy out of a mall than a second tier city because they can't find the kind of brands that they can find on these platforms.
This almost feels like the perfect segue straight to quick commerce. Should we jump to that?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Right, because it's an extension of e-commerce, and well, depending, maybe it's a new category. We'll figure that out. But quick commerce. So for those who don't know, I mean, Jangan, you presupposed the question is quick commerce folding, but apparently we kind of already know that this kind of started for a few companies that are notable brand names. But for those who don't know, quick commerce is what 10 to 15 minute deliveries using dark stores or these convenience stores that are not really official. Then allows you to order fresh foods, alcohol, drinks, beverages, food even, and get it to your doorstep in 10 or 15 minutes, right? Last year, 2021, depending on what source, I saw an FT article saying 14 billion was invested in this space, but I'm not sure if that's including groceries. I couldn't access the full article, but another article said around 4 billion. So somewhere between 4 and 14 billion was invested last year. Notable names that we know: Fridge No More, Joker, Gorillas, Buke, Getir, GoPuff, Yandex, the Russian corporation's Yango Deli. Right, and on the fringes, we have the Uber Eats, Food Pandas, Delivery Heroes, which is like kind of indirect competitors. India has Swiggy and Blinkit. Southeast Asia now has Astro, Bananas, Dropsy, and Beep Beep. Food Panda Hong Kong recently did a partnership with Sasa Beauty Company for 15-minute delivery. It seems to be quite early in Southeast Asia. These guys are starting to launch and enter, but in other markets, we're seeing some of these big names shut down, right? And we kind of seen this before in the rideshare space, where big valuations, big money, top line, price wars, marketplace execution, and ops. We kind of know how this ends up, consolidation, acquisitions. But it feels like the cycle is happening faster, right? Early in March in 2022, Fridge No More is no more. They shut down. Buke filed Chapter 11 earlier in the month. Yango Deli, the Yandex group, these guys are, Buke and Yango Deli, they're tied to Russian companies, so they're blaming the war. But I think we could probably discuss whether that's, should you blame macro environment or is it just not a good business? But they Yango Deli shut down in France to focus on other Western European countries. Zomato is acquiring Blinkit at a stock deal of $700 to $800 million. Getir raised $768 million at a $12 billion valuation. To give you some context, McKinsey put the total food delivery market at 150 billion. So that's a huge chunk, right? Depending if you think that's additive or you think it's a new category or if you think it's taking away from food delivery. Gorillas last year raised 1 billion. GoPuff is going beyond the US. They've acquired companies in the UK as well. I don't know. So it's interesting. I think we have two different viewpoints here, right? I think some people are skeptical this is actually driving value. Andrew earlier was claiming now he's a hardcore believer, uses them every day. So I don't know who wants to tee this off. What you guys think of this 15-minute delivery? We saw a lot of them are some of the big names who raise a lot of money are shutting down. Is this going to continue all the way through? Will this put a stop to the sky starting in Southeast Asia, or is it a real problem? Is it a new category? Who wants to go first? Andrew, you don't want to defend this. You're just saying you use it every day. It's great, no?
No, I want to hear the negatives first. I want to hear the negatives first. Let's go.
He's using his debating techniques.
That's
Be
right.
careful what you say.
This is something that we have discussed for a while, and this is a sector that at first you have the startups which are raising lots of money, and the second you also have the large food delivery players which are looking for a new sector of growth. And we all know that especially in the grocery part, this is the market which people have been trying repeatedly over the last, not repeatedly, but a few times over the last two decades to try to crack, and it remains that the last market to be penetrated by e-commerce, and I don't think anybody's doing that effectively in a sustainable model yet. So what I'm trying to understand is what is missing, right? And of course, I see the reason why people keep throwing money once every few years into these companies because the marketplace is big, but how exactly are we able to eventually crack this market, and will this market be eventually cracked? I've discussed with friends who've been running the flash part of by part of Meituan, and they said basically there are two categories which are basically working for them. I mean, first is medicine, and the second is flowers.
Interesting.
And these are generating enough frequency and sort of enough GMV, but this is based on the fact that they already have a fleet of delivery riders which are making small profit on food delivery itself, so that they don't maintain a fulfillment basically fulfillment infrastructure just for the quick commerce part per se. But even that with the grocers part of Meituan, it's still quite tough for them to figure out, I mean, how to do it in the sort of a sustainable and profitable way. So I'm curious, I mean, how this can be cracked. I don't have answer for that. I think lots of people have been debating on that. So what's your guys' sense?
Well, I think you brought up a really interesting point. Is I think you do need to delineate between companies that have their own proprietary infrastructure, i.e., they run like these ghost stores or ghost kitchen, versus the players that are more like platform players, right? Where they have like a technology layer, and then they have maybe like their own logistics suite, but then ultimately they're working as these like marketplaces or aggregators for third-party businesses, right? And I think we need to, my assertion for this particular business is I've always believed that the people that try to do it as a standalone, so sort of like the 15-minute grocery delivery segment, those are the ones that are fundamentally going to be the weakest at this, right? And I just look at it from basically like, it's just I come from it from like a unit economics level, right? So like we look at, I compare this to say I think actually what you brought up, like Meituan with flowers and medicine, is actually a good example, right? So I think why those two categories work, and I know some players in this part of the world that do flower delivery and their margins and growth are quite good, is because typically flowers are a relatively speaking high basket good, right? So if you go and you buy flowers for your girlfriend or your mom or your boyfriend or whatever it is, right? You're probably spending somewhere in the vicinity of like, I don't know, 100 to 200 ringgit. So that's like what, 20 to 50 US dollars. And so at those margin levels, I think you can support, the infrastructure costs needed. But if you're talking about like people who are, the value proposition is, I'm going to sell you like a banana and deliver a banana to you in 15 minutes, or I'm going to sell you like a banana and a set of batteries, the numbers on that just don't work out. Like a banana is like what, I don't know, 5 ringgit, 10 ringgit. So there's no way that you could potentially ever like make the economics work on those sorts of businesses.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things about that. I think you kind of astutely point out margin and economics need to be healthy. So what I was researching is that a lot of the bigger players like GoPuff or some of these other guys, their strategy is to go for vertical integration. So a lot of them are buying up dark kitchens. A lot of them, so essentially they're heading into direct competition with the other platform players that are already established, like Ubers and the Grabs, right? So it seems that if you keep going more vertical, essentially you end up becoming one of these kind of players, I guess. So then the question is like, what else does it really differentiate? And is this just a marketing ploy where these platform players were going to get to 10-15 minute deliveries anyway, or do they actually deliver in 10-15 minutes? I guess Andrew, you could tell us since you've been using it. And I do think that there will be a few categories that make sense. From a margin perspective, they can capture it. But at the same time, we saw other models like Lalamove that just seemed to work as just a delivery player, and just delivery fee alone was good enough, and you just go for volume, right? So and the cost is just all into the consumer. So there are various models of this that exist and kind of work. It's just, to me, it's just the question that does the value really make sense? Because you have to say it's a new category completely, where 10-15 minutes is like a 10x product game changer, where my whole behavior shifts and does that now, which I am somewhat skeptical about that. Other than that, it may be possibly a feature that stays, but maybe it's not worth 12 or 15, $20 billion in current stage, unless that behavior shift changes. I don't know. So Andrew, what do you say?
It's very difficult to unpack this, right? So I think, this is to draw a parallel. It's like these conversations I have with people about crypto, and everyone's so negative about it because they're not able to see like the potential this thing can go. I'm not trying to say like,
It's on
I feel like we always have these conversations and I'm the only optimist. And like, I get why you guys are pessimistic. There's a lot of things that don't work, but let's cut through. The reason why these companies were able to grow their high is because there was an opportunity that arose during COVID. Wait, first of all, can you guys hear me well?
Yes.
The closer the better.
Perfect. So there's an opportunity that arose during COVID, which is properties became cheaper. There were a lot of distressed assets on market that could have become a great way to rent warehouses for cheap, micro warehouses, basically, right? Number one. Number two, labor became very cheap. A lot of people were laid off from their jobs, and the idea of like doing deliveries and working in these kinds of businesses started to grow, right? So suddenly, two cost items, which is warehousing and labor for deliveries and managing these warehouses, became very cheap. On the flip side, a lot of people were working from home. So the demand for these kinds of services, groceries and food being delivered to homes increased, right? So you had an opportunity where the cost for these operationally heavily businesses dropped dramatically. And on the flip side, the demand increased dramatically. So the pandemic created an opportunity for the businesses to exist when they didn't do before. The unit economics never made sense, right? We tried doing something similar in Jakarta before, and it was a nightmare, right? Now you compound that to the fact that where these businesses are happening are in places where the delivery economics really, really work well, right? So there's high urban density, you can do multiple stops. There's ways of optimizing how fast the deliveries can happen so that you can actually do like route dynamics and all these other kinds of measurements that allow your deliveries to be super fast. The hub and spoke model can work a bit better if you can share assets with other distressed players who may not be willing to give up their whole space but have a little bit of space in the back, for example, right? So the dynamics worked from 2020 to 2022. The big question is, will it continue to work? And I truly believe the dynamics work, right? It's not just like it was like if you look at the unit economics of these players in the last 2 years, they're incredible, which is why they raised the valuations they were able to. VCs are not stupid, right? Not people aren't throwing money at them because like the math isn't right. The math is incredible, right? The fact that they're able to do this. Also, think about this, right? They're doing it for top 3,000 SKUs. They're picking the SKUs that really will push, that are highly liquid. They're constantly optimizing the SKUs that they're running. They're going to drop SKUs and have very little inventory risk. Over time, they start to figure out demand generation and they figure out how to place products in the right place at the right time so that you have the right kinds of products. They have hub and spoke so you can push from a mega cheap warehouse outside of the city into the right spokes so that, when you run out of this particular product, there's balancing between them, right? So it's not as simple as just saying rent back warehouses. There's a lot of optimization. There's a lot of like inventory optimization. So there's a reduction in inventory risk, right? And then because of the way they run that business, your working capital needs are a bit less than if you were a convenience store, for example, right? Because you're using your square footage um, a lot more efficiently. They're like vending markets on steroids. That's how you need to think about them, right? They're vending machines, except they have 3,000 SKUs. And the optimization between the warehouse and the vending machine is very, very smart. And that's first mile added on top of that, right? And vending machines can work in cities where people are willing to pay high price points for them, right? So now then the question is demand going to sustain itself over time? Here's the funny thing, right? Every food app in London and in New York is also trying to do deliveries. In LATAM, Rappi is moving so fast in Rappi Turbo, which is this 15-minute business, right? So every food delivery app is also moving this business because they see where it's working and how profitable it is and how they can actually have it as on the back end of their food business, right? Number one. Number two is I've been using these grocery services because, like, if you think about it, sure, you can walk over to Waitrose and buy your groceries, or the guy can deliver it for like £1, and like the assortment is pretty much the same. So you're like, why do I really need to walk out? I'm busy. I need to get some shit done. I have a bunch of calls back to back using them. In honesty, the reason why I've used the app a lot is because of the alcohol, right? And this is a very important point. I don't know if you guys know this, but convenience stores in Southeast Asia, almost 40%, in some markets, 50% of their revenues comes from cigarettes, right? I wouldn't be surprised.
It's true.
I wouldn't be surprised because my use case, I've used Zap. Zap is the one that my 15-minute delivery of choice app, and I've used Zap 3 times in this last 10 days. Each time was alcohol. Each time was wine.
Yeah.
So I was basically at someone's house. We were drinking, and then they were like, "Oh, guys, we ran out of wine." And I'm like, "Don't worry, guys, I got this." Right? And you pay, cheapest prices in market for like really decent wine, or champagne or whatever beers, and it gets right. So in markets where the demand for this kind of like late night, last minute alcohol is, I wouldn't be surprised if like 40-50% of the income just comes from alcohol, right? And they start to circumvent bars. They're eating market share from bars. They're eating market share from, drink delivery apps, which didn't exist in the past, or they took 3 days to deliver. So my theory is like a lot of these businesses are maybe 50% alcohol delivery, 50% grocery delivery, and the alcohol delivery massively subsidizes a lot of the other parts of the business. Because when you're drunk at 2 a.m., do you really care? Because you don't have a choice.
So, so that's strong. I've not looked at the data myself, but I've heard from multiple people that the medicine delivery companies in China, like JD Health or whatever, more than half of what they deliver is basically family planning items.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, that makes sense. Family
You
planning.
can ask Sergi. You can ask Sergi in Thailand how much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I'm not like saying I'm completely pessimistic on the whole model. I do like certain categories will make sense. And to me, it's just a question, will those categories be enough to size to, justify the valuation? And if not, how do you get bigger? They start going more vertical when you start directly competing, right? Then just this whole cycle that we kind of just discussed. So, I mean, I do think there's a certain innovation. The arbitrage element that you talk about makes a lot of sense to me. It's just, it depends. It's going to find its feet in a few cities for a few niche cases that make sense. But like, by and large for, I don't know how convenient New York is already. Like every corner has a bodega or convenience store already. And people like to walk in New York. My sister says no one's using them, even though she sees them everywhere. Of course, that's a bubble, but I think, yeah, other cities, maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll work in San Francisco. Maybe tech bros don't want to interact with people. Who knows? Right. And London, your case maybe makes sense for certain pockets. Right. So it is solving a problem use case. It's just a question of, stickiness and size. Right. So, and your anecdote's spot on too. My friend in Bangkok was
Even if they do just alcohol delivery on level business, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be a business that doesn't die, but does it justify like 12 billion out of $150 billion market? That's my question. Right. So
I do alcohol delivery on its own inventory, or you work with third parties to build a $1 billion business. So to build $1 billion business, do you do alcohol delivery based on your own inventory with micro warehouses, or you work with third parties?
I would say own inventory, because that's where you earn most of the margin. No?
I think you probably start by trying to figure out what categories work for your market, right? So you do like third parties to launch. Eventually, you start to build your own directly to the source where you got better margins overall, right?
Correct.
I think for alcohol, unless you get into wine, otherwise if you deal with beer and hard liquor, it's very limited SKUs that you need to prepare.
Well, also that's what I was wondering. So like for Vietnam, Philippines, I don't know, but does that work as well for Indonesia, Malaysia for alcohol? I mean, cigarettes, sure. I mean, everyone smokes, right?
Yeah, but you can't do cigarettes we tried doing like alcohol deliveries in Malaysia. It's really, really difficult because
big sis, the small though.
No, but not just that, right? Like there's a lot of verifications. You need to verify
okay.
You're living
Yeah.
under 18. Sorry,
Yeah.
above 18.
Whoa. What were you selling to, Andrew?
Don't rat on me. But okay, so first you have to verify they're above 18. And the second you have to verify that they're not Muslim, which is a requirement in Malaysia, right? Yeah. And that's really difficult because like if you got it wrong, the PR disaster is massive.
Yeah. So which means it makes sense for a company, a payment company, which has done KYC on its customers to deliver that instead of
but that's not
the foreign customer.
It's about one person ordering and someone else picking it up, right?
Yeah.
Your dad's account. That's where the PR disaster.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a big question mark still. I'm not completely dismissing it, but I do think a lot of categories are just frou-frou.
So quick question on this. When do you think that fresh groceries will be cracked by e-commerce anywhere in this world?
Fresh? Like groceries?
Like fresh produce?
Huh?
You mean by fresh, you mean like fresh produce, right?
Yeah, fresh produce.
Are you talking about quick or you're talking about general grocery delivery?
I think general even.
I mean, like, I think it's a permanent category for a certain percentage in the US already. Now, I don't know if the valuations are there either, but I think it's to stay for a certain percentage for that kind of market. Um, I don't know anywhere else though. I mean, Andrew would know. He's an actual customer, so he would know better from his experience. But for me, I'm not a customer.
What's the question?
Where do you think in the world we'll have cracked fresh like grocery delivery and have it as a solid business model that's quote unquote successful, whatever that means?
Dude, I think like this is a question of time, right? I was recently reading a report that says like the current generation of people who are in high schools believe that their identities are more valid online than they are offline, right?
Mm,
Right. So we're working,
yeah.
we're working in a world where people are going to spend more of their times online. They don't see the need of being present in this physical grocery
Yeah.
store. Like think about Malaysia, right? Like it's not like a walkable city. You don't exactly walk to your Tesco. You actually have to drive out there. It's a pain in the ass. You have to park, which is a pain in the ass. Then you have to get your shit, get in the car, come back. That's like 40 minutes to
Yeah.
do groceries. It's not like, this. In fact, like these markets is where like convenience is a much stronger argument than in some of these developed economies, right? So I do think like you take a digital world where people are much more used to using apps, and then you compound that with how painful the offline experience is. You can have that transition even in action not
Yeah.
hard to gauge.
Yeah, I buy your thesis if they could remove a lot of the annoying frictions, like out of stock, low quality produce that you didn't want to pick. Like if they could solve those, it makes a lot of sense to me actually. Because my biggest hangups about these is just that it's not that much more different than me walking and like driving out and buying it myself. But like if it's like that exponentially better, maybe we are just the old men grumbling here, right? It could be the preferred method going forward. Like for you using because you get the value out of it, right? So maybe. What about China, Jiangan? Like, I'm sure it has to have quote unquote cracked in China, no? Or is it not a big category? Is it loss making in China? Or
But yes. I don't know. I've seen. I personally have seen probably 20 decks of different business models. I mean, depending on how close the inventory is to the final customer. So yeah, but nobody's able to sustain that business model in a profitable way. So I guess there are a few factors to that. I mean, first is the competitive landscape in China. I mean, whatever you do is just terribly competitive, if even now. So many of these business models, they're competing against players in adjacent industries who are trying to basically fulfill the same demand from customers. And even in the same industry, you would have multiple players. So that pressure makes it very hard for players to make money. I do think in terms of efficiency, if you look at some of the players in China, they have done a lot of operational refinement to make sure that each part of the operations is as frictionless as possible. But in the real world, there's still lots of friction, and there's still lots of efficiency that they could theoretically arrive, but just not there yet. And of course, it's compounded with this on and off lockdowns in China. So which makes it really hard for anyone to basically do things in a sustainable way. So I don't know. I don't think anybody has cracked that in a sustainable, profitable way. But also the question I've been asking myself and be discussing with a few people is that if you remove all this competition and leaving just, I don't know, 3 or 4 players just trying a different model, maybe things would have worked out.
well, yeah, maybe that's where Amazon is heading, or maybe Instacart goes and builds out their direct to the farm to through the the end customers. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of old world problems with traditional grocery that tech kind of needs to solve first, and then that's why working with them doesn't really work as well. Yeah. Dave, do you want to say something? Why don't you close out, Dave?
No, I mean, I think, okay, there's a lot of points here, right? I think okay, so my thought about this is really it's a question of like, yeah, how big is this market? And I sort of think about this from the historical lens of tech, right? And I think, over the last 15 to 20 years, we've had different sectors where we had like a old world component, like an atoms component, and we try and pair that with a tech solution, right?
Yeah.
So some examples if we go through history is, let's say, like Groupon. Groupon is an example. It's like deals, right? You're connecting local businesses through through the internet to customers.
Yeah.
Or ride sharing. Ride sharing is an even better example, right? You're solving like what's traditionally been a physically constrained problem through technology. Obviously, instant groceries is an example of this, right? And I think if you just like look at the history of tech, each time when people try to um, address these issues with a technological innovation, you end up raising or creating these financial incentives and structures where they're treated as if they were purely a tech company, as in a software company. And for whatever reason, people kind of ignore the fact that these businesses are always going to be, on some level, fundamentally constrained by the physical world. Um, and I don't, and this is where I think for me the real not frustration, but the question mark comes in, right? It's like because it's like I said, it's like every time one of these businesses come, I mean, it's in different forms and different fashions and different sectors, but ultimately it's always the same question, right? Or it's always the same constraint, right? You have something that will never be infinitely scalable because you always need to have this component that's based in the real world. But for whatever reason, people always forget, right? I think it's just like a human thing. People forget, recency bias, or we're not, evolutionarily wired to remember more than a couple years in the past and project out a couple years in the future. And so, I think we're going to be in this cycle for a long time. I'm sure in like another 15 years or 10 years, we're going to be having the exact same conversation about something that's tangentially dissimilar, or someone else will try groceries again. And I think until you can fundamentally remove that, like several layers of the physical world from it, we'll never get out of this question, right? I mean, it's basically the question of like, can like Uber ever live up to its like $100 billion valuation, whatever it was at the time, right? Yeah, maybe when they invent driverless cars, they can remove the entire human component of it. And I think maybe this is the same. Like, yes,
Mm.
can we get to a point where one day one of
Yeah.
these quick order companies can actually be worth 14 billion or whatever their actual valuations are? Like, yeah, maybe when you get to a point where you have a robot,
Robot
pick and pack
inventory.
and then deliver it to your house, and then at that point, yeah, your numbers will start to make sense. But until that happens, I think we're gonna be, we'll repeat the cycle again in like 10 years probably or less.
Interesting. I agree with you. All right, shall we move on to the Ronin hack?
Oh yeah, I got a whole thing for this. I'm ready.
So, Ronin hack, Ronin Networks, which is the network that powers Axie Infinity as an exchange for the crypto coins gained by playing Axie, uh, it was hacked, right? For March 23rd, it was basically, I don't know, over $500 million USD in value of crypto was stolen. It was a heist, right? It was only discovered a week later on March 29th. And how exactly did this happen? You probably need to know a little bit about basics of blockchain technology. Should I bother to go through this quickly?
I can do it.
Uh,
Can you share the presentation that I made? Because this basically talks about it.
okay, let me quickly talk about the blocks, and then
Okay.
I'll show you a presentation. So basically, if for the audience who's not as familiar with blockchains, right? Blockchain technology basically consists, it's essentially just information in the form of a block, and it connects to another block in the form of a chain, right? And these blocks are stored on nodes, and there should be multiple nodes, which is like basically a small server you could think of it. And each of these nodes has a whole copy of all the chains of data of all the transactions that are connected, and they all need to reference each other for it to be valid. And basically what happened with Axie Infinity is that their blockchain, which is, the theory with blockchain technology is that it's supposed to be sufficiently decentralized across, I don't know what, millions of nodes, right? But what happened was that they only had 9 nodes, and 5 out of the 9 nodes were only needed to be authenticated in order for a transaction to pass, right? So what happened is the hacker was able to hack 4 private encryption keys or security keys to approve a transaction on the Ronin network. And then he was able to hack the final one, which is a little bit harder, on the Axie Infinity DAO, with decentralized autonomous organization. So basically, that's just a group or community of developers who manage the Axie Infinity game. They have their own constitution, right? No one person really controls it. And that was the last one that was the last key that was stolen from them was needed. And the reason why they were able to do that was because back in November, there was a huge surge in new users on the Axie Infinity game, and Ronin network was asking the DAO to give whitelist capabilities to approve certain transactions without any checks and balances. And so basically the DAO agreed. And what happened was they never turned it off when things settled down back in December. And they were able to exploit this whitelist approval of any transaction to get the final key. And thus the fifth key was stolen, and they were able to transfer out roughly, was it like 175,000 ETH and something like 25,000 stablecoin USDC, which was now, the value has risen up to about 600 million USD that was stolen. So Dave, I guess I can share your presentation if you want to take over.
Yes, please do.
I'm back.
Okay. So I'm going to apologize again to the pure audio listeners. I know I did this a couple months back, and so actually I went really deep on this topic in terms of centralization, or actually the lack of centralization in DeFi, right? So for everyone that's listening, DeFi, as we all know, stands for decentralized finance. But then the question really is how centralized and or decentralized is this? And I think, a lot of this is based off work that Balaji did. So for those who don't know, Balaji was the former CTO of Coinbase, and he was a partner at was it Andreessen, where he was the crypto partner. So I cribbed a lot of this information from him, or all of it from him. But I think just it's interesting to walk us through this as a basis of this conversation. So we're going to get into some graphs and charts. I'm going to have to talk about some economic concepts here. So apologies beforehand, that's not your thing. So to really get into centralization, decentralization, I think a useful proxy you could use for this from economics is the Lorenz curve and Gini coefficients, right? So as people know, Lorenz curves and Gini coefficients, they're essentially both ways that we can measure equality or income equality. That's what they're typically used for. But if you take that framework and you apply it to a centralization versus decentralization framework, what you could essentially say, or you can infer, is that in a perfectly decentralized environment, then your Gini coefficient would be 0 because everyone owns everything, or fully decentralized, right? The converse of that is, in a perfectly centralized environment, your Gini coefficient would be 1 because one person controls everything, right? So what I have here is, and the reason we're going through this is because we need to establish some foundations first. So this is the Lorenz curve for those of you who are uninitiated. So Lorenz curve, for those of you who are just listening, on the x-axis, you have the percentage of households by income distribution. On the y-axis, you have the cumulative share of income percentage, right? And then if you have perfect equality, it will be a 45-degree line going through. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Of course, that's impossible. So when you graph out the actual distribution of the income along the curve, that's where you get the theoretical Lorenz curve, right? So everyone follow this so far? And then the Gini coefficient is basically the area between perfect equality and the Lorenz curve, which is A, divided by A plus B, which is the total area below, right? So let's move on to some, more concrete examples. So next slide, please, Alex. I forgot you're doing this. So let's look at the essential, as a proxy. Again, using Gini coefficient as a proxy for centralization versus decentralization in the context of cryptocurrency, let's look at how centralized cryptocurrency actually is, right? So what we have here is we have the cumulative percentage of cryptocurrency. So these are the actual individual coins or currencies, and then the market cap of them, right? So as you can see, basically the top two, so the crypto in general is very, very top heavy. So the Gini coefficient is 0.91 when we look at coins to market cap, which basically means it's perfectly centralized almost from a coin to market cap perspective. So if you control basically the top 2 cryptocurrencies, you control like 60-70% of the total market cap of all crypto, right? So everyone follow along this analogy so far? Yes. Okay, so let's move on. Next slide, please. So then we basically, you can apply this to the various subsystems within a public blockchain. So according to Balaji, a public blockchain is usually composed of 6 subcomponents or subsystems, right? There's mining, and then mining is self-explanatory. The client, which is your code base, the developers, so number of people that committed to each code base, the exchanges on which they're traded, the nodes, which is by country, and then the ownership, which is by IP addresses. And so you can obviously take away or add subsystems to this depending on like the framework that you want to use. So let's just, for the purpose of this, we'll keep this framework. So next slide, please. So what you see here is you see basically each of these 6 subsystems mapped out using the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. So you can get a sense for how centralized and or decentralized each of these subsystems are, right? So if you look at Bitcoin mining is actually pretty decentralized, right? If you look at that curve, it's a pretty non-aggressive upward trend, right? So the Gini coefficient on mining for Bitcoin is 0.4, right? Now, if you want to look at a inverse example, like what is the most centralized part of the Bitcoin subsystem, it's going to be the code base because most people just use Bitcoin. So it's basically 1, right? We're close to 1. Or if you want to look at, say, the node decentralization factor or the Bitcoin ownership, we're talking like a 0.85 or 0.84, right? And then go to the next slide, Alex. So we did the same, sorry, one slide back. So the same exercise was done for ETH. So again, looking at each of the 6 subsystems and looking at basically which ones of these are the most centralized versus which one of these are the most decentralized. So for ETH, mining is the most decentralized, whereas for, I think node is the most centralized, or sorry, the client is. So then go to the next slide, Alex. Right? So basically what's the saying, right, is for any given public cryptocurrency, you're only as decentralized or centralized as your most decentralized or centralized subsystem, right? Because if one entity or party controls any one of those subsystems, they essentially control the entire currency, right? So basically what you do is when you map this all out and you do the math, right, you look at the maximum to basically get a sense of what is the decentralization, centralization of each of these chains. So basically, and to be fair, this was 2017 data, so this has obviously changed a lot in the 5 years in between. But basically, if you're looking at this, right, the maximum Gini coefficients of both ETH and Bitcoin are pretty similar. They're 0.915 and 0.92. Of course, a lot of that is because they're all using the same code base. So if we exclude the code base part of it, it's still pretty high, right? We're looking at 0.85 to 0.8, which means these are actually pretty centralized currencies. Okay. And let's go to the next slide, Alex. And so now we're gaining sort of like a way to like quantify. And then what is more commonly used these days is something known as the Nakamoto coefficient. So the Nakamoto coefficient basically says how many parties would you need to control 51% of that particular subsystem, right? So basically what it's saying, go to the next slide, Alex. Like, so for each of these subsystems, how many of the players or actors would you need to coerce into a room for you to have complete control of that cryptocurrency, right? So basically, again, using Bitcoin as our basic line example, if you get the people or the party or the entity that controls the code base into the room and coerce them to do whatever you want, you can control Bitcoin, right? On the flip side of that, if you're trying to look at it from an ownership perspective, you would need to amalgamate 456 people into the same room to control Bitcoin via the ownership subsystem. And then I think for this, just skip to the last slide 10. I'll let you can skip each for now. One more. So basically, one back. Go one back. Yeah. So this is the same as the previous slide, except now it's just written out in more clearly seen language. Like basically, you know, if you were to try and capture or attack or control one of these cryptocurrencies, like where in terms of like number of nodes for you to capture or which subsystem for you to look at, which ones are the easiest ones, right? So as you can see, if you wanted to basically control Ethereum on the ownership subsystem, you need to control 72 entities that control this. Whereas for Bitcoin, that'd be 456. Where if you're looking at exchanges, like how many of the exchanges we need to control one of these, you need to control 5 for each of these, right? So last slide then, please, Alex. So basically, the question that I was asking is like, okay, so how centralized? So again, the previous slide were 2017 numbers. These are the most up-to-date ones I could find for 2021. So these are the Nakamoto coefficients for a lot of the major currencies right now, updated in 2021. So basically, as you can see, Bitcoin actually has increased substantially. So you now need to control 7,841. That's its Nakamoto coefficient, which I assume is the proxy for, I don't remember exactly which substance it's tied to, but I assume it's like validators.
Probably related to its validators, right? Which is
Validators, right? Whereas like for a lot of these other ones, they're actually not that decentralized, right? For like Polygon, you need to control 2 of the validators to basically control the entire chain. So I think it's just an interesting framework to look at, DeFi, right? And then look at like, which ones
really.
actually live up to the promise of being decentralized and which ones don't. And honestly, if we're looking at these, and people can run this analysis on their own, and the data is all on the chain, right? But like basically most of them are not that decentralized. And like this hack that happened with Ronin, it's not that out of the, it's not that far of a stretch. Like if you look at like say Solana, to control Solana, you only need to control 19 of the 1,249 validators. So, for people who want to target which cryptocurrencies to hack, look at.
And I mean, the reason all of this is centralized was because they needed more efficiency, so they gave up centralization, right? So, and then the quote I got, which is crazier from the Ronin guys, was that the reason why the threshold was so low, according to Sky Mavis, was that some nodes didn't catch up and the chains were stuck in sinking state. So therefore, they just reduced the number of nodes needed so they could process faster, right? Which basically, from a security perspective, and whole point of DeFi, allowed the weakness for it to be hacked, I guess. And that's probably exactly what happened. And it doesn't seem that like they're likely to get this money back unless they're able to identify who this is and dox them. So to put social pressure, because if not, there's no need to give back the money. And if they don't care about money, it's even worse because then they're not looking for that payout. But apparently the hacker was trying to send money out to different exchanges where there's KYC needed. So people were saying that's stupid. But I think the more interesting that I found out is that in most of these cases, like these hacks are quite common. Like the largest 5, this is like not the largest even. There's been 5 more from 2014, 2018 to 2021 and 2022, where they're ranging from the lowest is 325 million up to 600 million from the Poly network, right? So, but the most interesting thing is that what happens is that these guys end up they can't liquidate the money because they freeze the bridges. They can't actually go to an exchange to get it out. But if they don't get the money back, basically the whole blockchain's dead. Completely dead. So Axie Infinity can't be dead if they can get back the money. So if they turn on the bridge now, the whole thing's just going to tank. So what happens is usually they'll give up 5 to 10% of the stolen money as a bounty, and they work backwards as a PR story to pretend that it was a whitelisting hack. And so I don't know how this is going to pan out, but I found it really funny that ironically, money gets returned because the hacker can't actually have the money, but they keep some of it. And then, it's just a very tangible overall. So I don't know what Andrew or John Gann, what was your take on this?
Hey guys, I actually think Dave's take was so good on this that you're not gonna get a great response. I got headlines out of this. Like, we're gonna dive into Lorentz curves. I mean, don't get an input on me, no? Like, come on, bro.
Shit. Okay, sorry. No more economics talk next night.
I mean, to me, it's not that. Look, a lot of people are going to say that this proves that it's not a good active castle, it's not secure, but it's not true. It's just that these guys need to push for more actual nodes.
Ultimately, the reason why you have crypto in the because you want to prevent a 51% attack, right? That's the reason why you do any sort of validation or any sort of like crypto.
Well, the original idea, yes.
The original idea. And now basically what this analysis is telling us is that a lot of them, you just don't like to get a 51%. you actually need very few validators, right?
What you
And then
still need 51%, but it's just like 50% of 2 people, right? Or two nodes
Yeah,
or
correct.
whatever.
Yeah,
Which
no, that
exactly.
makes sense, right? I mean, we knew when Solana launched, it was like a bunch of people that were controlling everything. And I do agree, right? The question is like, which L1 chains are the safest? And Bitcoin, and this is why like people like Jack Dorsey are throwing their strength behind Bitcoin, right? Because it's not just about
Yeah, correct. It's
decentralization, it's which app has the most amount of decentralization. And a lot of people think it's Bitcoin. So I agree. This analysis makes sense and makes sense why the Ronin hack happened. It also makes sense that a lot of these chains aren't decentralized at all. The question is like, and the deeper question here is like, this is the L1 level. There's a lot of startups that are trying to build like L0 multi-chain protocols, right? Will those multi-chain protocols,
Can you explain multi-chain versus cross-chain?
basically the same thing. So you could build a D app that allows yourself to work with multiple chains.
Different types of blockchains.
Correct. At the
Yeah.
same time. So cross-chain, but simultaneous.
Okay.
And so in theory, this actually validates having these multi-chains. It's almost saying work with just a single protocol at a time and pick the protocol that is the safest, right?
Well, it's this hack is, it's not because, I mean, look, yeah, in theory, it could have been more secure with more nodes, but honestly, with just better governance, this wouldn't have happened. So for example, the question is like, why in the hell is there so little nodes? So that's a governance side from the Sky Mavis side. The second part is, why did a DAO, and the DAO is just a group of developers. So who is in control of the developers to decide, oh, by the way, I'm responsible now to turn off this whitelisting thing, right? So there's a governance problem on a DAO side in the constitution, and a governance side on the actual developer sides of, Sky Mavis, which made Axie, made Ronin, made everything, right? So it's, to me, it's just, again, it's just human error. It's not really the technology's wrong. It's just that, I mean, I don't know, hopefully this is now a signal to other blockchains or other, DAOs to probably shape up their governance.
Yeah.
And it probably gives a boost to the guys who are already more centralized, like Bitcoin. And I
Be
guess my last
decentralized.
insight is, yeah, I mean, this is like, yes, I'm more just saying centralized, but the thing is, like, to me, it's like, this is like the 5th or 6th time of this scale of hundreds of millions of dollars are stolen, and it still hasn't been addressed, right? So it's just kind of weird that, for an unregulated market for this much scale and money, you hear people have actually lost their life savings in this kind of heist, this latest heist, so, I don't know if this means more regulatory scrutiny or even how that's possible, but, it just, governance needs to ship up, and I'm surprised it's not being addressed sooner. So, yeah, that's my final take.
I mean, but I think that's for me, that's the take of this, right? Is this really just needs to be regulated like any other security, right? Like I just
So much
the
money.
whole idea that a utility token is not a security. I've never bought that argument. I mean, I'll tell you guys a story. I was telling this to Alex over lunch today. So I have an actor friend. He's an actor, right? And he's been out of work the last couple of years because there's not been a lot of productions in Malaysia. So I was having dinner with him the other week, and I was like, "Oh, what have you been doing for money in the last like year and a half? Because there's not a lot of TV productions." And he told me this crazy story. Maybe that's not that crazy. Basically, these Chinese like cryptocurrency companies will hire him to go to these conferences in China. He's a white guy, and basically he goes and pretends to be their CEO and speaks at these events because apparently being white still has some, obvious some like credibility bonus points in China. So he does like an hour of work a month. He does like one talk. He's surrounded by bodyguards who are just like his translators / people that actually work at the company. So if he gets like approached for a question after the fact, like all these like actual crypto people that know what they're talking about will answer the question, then he'll leave. Like it's just like there's so much like shenanigans going on, which is I think a shame, because I do believe that there is like some utility in the technology, but I think this needs to be cleaned up a bit.
Hey guys, by the way, I need to jump for another meeting, but
Okay. All right, we'll let you
Okay,
up on, and we'll get Jangan's final piece.
Yeah.
what's Young's
Final piece.
You're not gonna comment, no? You didn't
No, I mean, so the question is that 600 million lost. Is that significant enough for some authorities to step in, or is it just something that that's a natural evolution of a new technology that's born by certain participants? And I'm sure that sends a warning to the others to step up their security. I have a friend who lost. His biggest single loss was 70 million USD worth of crypto at one heist, and he said, I mean, he has been attacked repeatedly every day, and it just forces his system to be more and more secure, and force him to evolve his basically the whole setup. And I asked him, I mean, do you work with any third parties? And he said no, because third parties that are available there are not fast enough to adapt to his needs. So
Yeah.
so the question is that I mean, how do we see a industry for crypto security evolve out of this, or we'll see that okay, the major players will each try to crack the security piece in their own way, and it's a race against the bad guys, right? I mean, of course, I don't know who are the bad guys, but
Well, the more institutionalized this gets, and the more the average Joe loses their life savings, which we've seen in every financial cycle dating back centuries, sooner or later regulation will come, depending how bad it gets and how widespread it gets systemically, right? So, I mean, it's not 600 million. I'm looking at the top 5, and it's already 2-3 billion, right? So, you keep pushing this way. Eventually, you'll come to head eventually. But right now, if it's the enthusiasts are only losing it, or you wait for the next big hedge fund guy to lose it, there's going to be some waves probably, right? So it just depends who loses and how much. So
Yeah.
yeah, your poor friend 17 is not enough, I guess. But yeah.
I don't. And also the question is that lots of these things run cross border, right? I mean, you need basically different regulators to come together to step up the governance, and would that ever take place? Because you always have I don't know, a few countries who are not willing to comply and who are benefiting from not complying.
Well, news
Don't you
just
think
the news is that Singapore has officially started to take a stance on it, right? Vietnam is building it into their next 5-year whatever plan it is. I think it's Vietnam is writing it into their policy making. There's quite a few countries who are doing it themselves, but I guess then you need to go across countries to link up to, I guess. So yeah, it's still quite far.
I mean, I think in that scenario, it'll probably just be led by like one of either the U.S. or China, right? I mean, the U.S. does this everywhere. They impose their financial rules on the rest of the world with very few exceptions, right? Yeah, I mean, as U.S. citizens, I mean, Alex and I are U.S. citizens, so we have the pleasure of dealing with this every single year come tax season. Basically, like if you want, they essentially what they say is like, if you want to do business in the U.S., like to a foreign bank, you have to comply with our rules and regulations, and everyone complies. That's what it is, and I think this will end up eventually being the same. One of the two major markets, whenever China launches their state-backed version of this, right, they'll probably roll out some similar program, and the U.S. will most likely do it at the same time. And Alex, I think it also depends on just like, how many people lose money and how much money, whether that matters politically.
But the only problem is then the government has to come up with their own chain with the most decentralized way or nodes, because you can't actually technically regulate the technology, right? You can't stop it if it's centralized enough. If it's it's even more decentralized than Bitcoin, like you can't just turn it off, right? So it will be kind of interesting how that does get regulated, I guess, right?
But you can impose standards. They already do. I mean,
the exchanges, I guess,
a lot of the exchanges already have KYC built into it. I mean, any of the what is the word when they actually own the coin for you? I can't remember. Can't think of the top of my head. All the KYC requirements already. So I mean, it's not like this is a far stretch.
Well,
all the custodial exchanges already have KYC requirements.
So this is relevant as long as this is a big asset class, but not taken over as fiat itself.
But how much of that is because of regulatory pressure? How much of that is because they want to protect themselves?
I mean, it's both. But that's the point. That's the point of I mean, that's the point of complying with regulatory pressure, is you want to protect yourself from whatever hammer that the government will throw at you.
And last year and a half, you see so many crypto exchanges, I mean, shifting their jurisdictions.
Yeah. Where have you seen?
Where have you seen?
I haven't followed.
I haven't followed the story. Where have you?
You see people move from Hong Kong to Singapore. I mean, people move from Singapore to Dubai. People move from Hong Kong to Bahamas.
But what is that? Why are they doing it? Is it to stay ahead of? Is it for more favorable regulatory environment, or is it? Why are they doing it?
I don't think it's just for the sunny weather.
No, I know. That's why I'm asking the question.
But I think regulations play a large part of that. I mean, if you look at what's happened in China, they basically took a very strong stance of cracking down all the crypto activities. I mean, they sent the best is send officials to local counties to basically inspect to make sure that the local government doesn't protect any miners and doesn't supply electricity to any miners.
Yeah.
They sent notes to Ali Cloud to ask them to basically go through all their customer list and disable all this running crypto. So basically it's a pretty harsh way of doing it.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
just
they-
like how they're trying to stamp out the COVID.
So what's interesting is that they maybe physically slow down what's like it happening in China as much to the extent they can, which is quite far. But what happened with that phase was that a lot of those miners actually just shifted out. They moved the operations to other countries, but stayed in China still, right? So they just operated abroad. So it didn't stop mining. It didn't stop the technology. Just stopped it from physically being in China. Probably, I think, if I understand that story correctly, when I talk to other mining friends and stuff. But yeah, it's. I mean, if it's can exist somewhere else, it's just going to shift around. The technology itself, if it's decentralized enough, just won't go away. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it turns out.
Alex, did you discuss about Gcash?
No, you could talk about it briefly if you want. We don't have much time.
I mean, we can talk on it next time. But it's an amazing story of cockfighting.
I mean, yeah, what we can do is, we could do a short session. If again, maybe sometime early next week, if people are free on Gcash alone, if you want. But I think we probably have to close out for this session because Dave's getting very angry.
Yeah.
Very angry.
Sorry, it's true.
Yeah, no, we did cover a lot. So, but I mean, yeah, I think the Gcash story might be interesting. I'm curious to hear what you think because when I researched it, just seemed like a bunch of really well-funded, market-dominant distribution players coming together to deploy.
I think
All that was a takeover, but
I think the bigger story behind it is that I mean, lots of people try to build wallets in Southeast Asia, and I think last year and a half, so people came to this belief that if you just do all the payment, you are not going to make money. And but if you look at Gcash, they turned profitable. So how they do that, and what that's applicable to other wallets in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. So
okay,
I
fair
think
enough.
Interesting
Yep.
story we should address next time. Yeah.
That was my takeaway too. Like, how does it apply to the rest of Southeast Asia? But I think there's very different specific macro dynamics that point to favors in Philippines. But let's discuss that next time, and we'll give a little teaser for our audience.
Of course.
Okay, thank you
Enjoyed in the
for your thank you for the episode, and we'll see you next time, guys. Bye.
Hey guys.
Bye.